Having finished with a brief introduction, a framework which will guide us in the preceding commentary, I have to clarify that when I use the words order or pleasure or absolute or whatever, I'm not saying this is a universal good. This is only a good for an organism dependent on order. It is not a cosmic rule, a cosmic telos, a cosmic goal, a motive governing all of reality. Whoever thinks this is a weakling who wants to project his own human fallibility upon the world and make it a cosmic interest, as with the Christians, when they project human needs into some imaginary creature, organism, being, thinking that they are loved, they are protected, their life is immortal through this creature. No, this is not the case. This is what weaklings do. This is what cowards do. When you confuse the words for some cosmic rule, you are an idiot. That's plain and simple. Words simply denote a relationship of organism with the world. It does not denote a cosmic universal rule. Since every evaluation is a relationship of the observer to the observed, the subject to the object, any value judgment is a relationship, a juxtaposition of organism with other organism, or organism in relation to an objective, a goal, a final destination, an ideal in most cases. Therefore, all relationships using words of subject to object or subjective to objective is a relationship in reference to a destination, a motive, a goal, a movement towards. For an animal, most often and most certainly, the destination is that of survival. The animal knows of no higher or something in excess of this motive. In order to overcome this motive, the mechanism of procreation, which puts it in a kind of frenzy, sexual madness, has to be applied in order to overcome not only its fight-flight mechanism, but also its primary motive, which is self-preservation. Only in humans does this ideal, this motive, become more than just survival or even procreation, and it becomes something beyond, something not immediate, not this has to do with the perceptual event horizon, which I will perhaps get into later. So because the human being can project patterns beyond the most immediate, it can be motivated by an ambition, a goal, a motive beyond pleasure, beyond reproduction, beyond self-preservation. And of course, this always presupposes an excess of resources. That is, the organism has to first be certain that its survival is taken care of before it goes beyond it. Of course, there's the cases where the sense of awareness becomes so strong that it even exceeds this primary motive of self-preservation, the survival, the life instinct, and self-replication, the sexual instinct. So now we've established a primary fundamental understanding of what words are. Words as symbols, well, not only words, but all symbols, as connectors of mind to body, or of mind in relation to world. So if the mind has is not affected by the world, as in the case of sheltering, then what does the word signify but in relation back to the body? So when there's no utility to the word, it becomes a symbol of an emotion, an esoteric meaning. Let me just clarify this. When the word, which is a symbol of a noumenon, an abstraction, which is a construct based on external stimulants in combination with internal stimulants for the purpose of maintaining the organism, begins losing this function, then the word becomes a symbol of a noumenon, which, having lost interest in the external because it's not as affected, turns inward. So it becomes a symbol of other noumenon, or combinations of noumenon, or combinations, to put another way, of abstractions, which can be manipulated much more easily. The external world cannot be manipulated. Whatever it is, the organism has to deal with the external world. Whereas internal abstractions can be more easily manipulated because the mind is connected to the body. So when the external world has less of an effect on the organism, then the organism becomes introspective, veering towards solipsism. So the words become an expression of its emotional, instinctive reactions to the world, now stored as memories, which have no importance to it because it is protected, sheltered. The external world has a minimal or a very small effect on it. Such in the case of modern man, who are protected from the external world and from the full repercussions of their own judgments. So this is where the word becomes more esoteric. So esotericism, if we want to use that word, is more of a product of sheltering. That is, only an organism that is in leisure. This is why philosophy is a consequence of leisure. Only an organism that has its basic needs fulfilled or guaranteed to some degree can turn into introspection to more esoteric interests, trying to express its reaction, its appreciation of world from a more detached perspective. Now this detachment is where the risk comes in, because for some this detachment is a reason enough to become more objective, that is, to detach self-interest from the world and therefore appreciate the world as an objective observer. Whereas other minds, being more base, cannot do this. So they use this opportunity to turn into what is more intuitive, more intimate to them, which is pleasure. That they use words to self-pleasure. In other words, to masturbate, mental masturbation. Philosophy for them becomes a form of mental masturbation. So words, being representations of noumenon, represent the motive of the organism. So if the organism is no longer motivated by the external world, that is no longer as concerned by external factors about reality, confronting it, it turns into internal reasons, motives, which have to do with emotions, with sensations, with relationships to other humans, I guess, to tribal hierarchies, how they can communicate their spirit, their meanings to other of their own kind, to others who share in the same code of communication, in other words, language, or the same meaning, that share the same meanings ascribed to symbols. So this has to do with the source of stimulants participating in the construction of abstractions. So as we said, there are two sources of constructing an abstraction. There's the internal, from the cells, from the body, from how the organs relate to themselves, sending messages to the brain, and there's the external, through the senses, the world which is out of the organism's control, sending stimulations to the brain via the senses, which are then interpreted, that is, converted to a method, to a code that the brain, the nervous system, can process, can transmit, and then process. This is why in my philosophy I call it interactions and interpretations, because there's an interpretation occurring. The organism is interpreting the external world into a code it can then process. So when the external world decreases in importance because it no longer affects the organism as severely as the internal, then what happens is the abstractions become more and more dominated by internal stimuli. So the organism now is becoming more introverted. Its abstractions become more an expression of how the internal processes are interpreted, because the internal processes don't have a imagery to be understood by the brain. So they have to be converted into an image from memory, from the external world, into a form that it can comprehend. So what are the internal stimuli? They are the product of the past, the sum of the past, the sum of nurturing, which we call nature. And this is why they become ambiguous, because they become instinctual, intuitive, because they are the product of centuries of evolution, and they have no imagery to accompany. They're just stimulations, there's data transmitted to the brain. So the brain has to understand them by converting them to a form that the brain can understand, which is taken from the external world, that is, imagery from the external stimulations. And this is why dreams become so confusing, because they are internal. The brain in sleep is cut off from the external world, so it draws from internal memories, cellular memories mingled with the previous day's memories, and they are converted into imagery which is taken from the organism's experiences, and this imagery gives it meaning. Otherwise it would have no meaning at all. This fact is what nihilism exploits, to create this noetic barrier, wall, between itself and the external world. It takes these fabrications and then uses them as evidence that everything is subjective, because essentially they are protected, sheltered from the external world. Because if they were not protected from the external world, there would be no debate. The organism, even if it made a mistake in judgment, would face the consequences of this mistake, and it would perish, or whatever, it would be heavily burdened. The cost would be immediate and obvious. There would be no debating, no constant debating over what the words mean, because the words in their original utility are just the ways of the organism giving a symbol to how it relates to the external world. So it's noumenon, relating to the phenomenon, we're giving it a symbol, and the symbol eventually became the word, became a language. And the more the external world ceased to affect the organism, placing it in an artificial world, a man-made world, which I've already defined elsewhere, the more its abstractions could be completely detached from the real world and can be combined in any fanciful way the organism desired. And now its goal is not really to survive, but how to seduce. Since its survival is pretty much guaranteed, its nutrition guaranteed, or it's easily attained, the only thing left would be sexual gratification, or its status within the system that provides the sheltering. So then words become from a tool, they become a toy, a ploy of seducing other organisms. And this is how philosophy became from what philosophy was in the past into politics, or the manipulation of the masses using rhetoric, using words. And because the external world didn't matter as much as it did in the past, there was no stringent rule limiting the mind in how it applied words. So the mind can now place the words in any combination it requires. It can use any word in any way, just as long. The only thing that matters is if others are convinced by it, are coerced by it, are manipulated by it. That's all that matters, because the organism is not affected by the application of the word in the world. It only matters that how the world is accepted by others of its own kind. And since the world no longer affects its survival, the only thing left is pleasure. So now the word became a measure of how much pleasure the organism could attain. And this is where nihilism has its starting point. Because its survival is guaranteed, and the only thing that matters is pleasure, words don't really have to be limited by anything external to the organism. The only thing that matters to the organism is how it pleasures, how it gives it pleasure, how much potential for pleasure it offers. So the nihilism comes in because now words can be used to completely detach from the world. Now this became a gradual process because human institutions were not as sophisticated in the past as they are today. So in other words, the barriers between organism and the world were not as sophisticated, whereas today, as technologies and techniques evolve, the sophistication increases and the sense of detachment, the detachment increases between mind and world. So then now words become much more effective in creating this illusion of complete independence from world, which means an independence from precedent, from past. And what does past mean? Past is another word for nature. And what does nature mean? It means the sum of all previous nurturing. So we no longer have to, with the modern, no longer has to sample from memory, from the past. No longer has to compare this to the present, which is already controlled by human intervention. So I can just now fabricate anything that pleases it, anything that feels good, anything that is seductive to as many other minds as possible. And this now becomes the measure of what is truth and what is valuable. It actually becomes the very definition of value.